Samantha, and I'll be your host for today. Thank you so much for attending the 8th Annual Startup Boston Week, and a huge thank you to Suffolk University's Sawyer Business School for hosting this conference. Suffolk University hosts a lot of great opportunities for learning, both in and outside these classrooms. We really appreciate their partnership, hosting the entirety of Startup Boston Week, both last year and this year. The goal behind Startup Boston Week is to connect the entire Greater Boston and New England startup community, all industries, all startup departments, and all bootstrapped and funding stages for 5 days of learning and connecting with one another. The team that creates Startup Boston Week is primarily volunteer, and the folks working the conference today here are volunteering their time as well. So thank you for attending this conference. It's a labor of love, and we appreciate you playing a role in shaping our startup community. And a huge thank you to the CIC for sponsoring this session. Woo. Startup Boston Week could not happen without the support of awesome partners like them. Thank you so much again for attending, and on to the session.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. So welcome. You all hopefully are here for our session on redefining the workplace, building a collaborative culture and hybrid workforce. Is anyone not here for that? All right, then you're in the right place for now. And so this is sponsored by CIC. We're the Cambridge Innovation Center, as we're known in this local community, but we create innovation ecosystems and focus on different workspaces and laboratories. We have campuses here in Cambridge as well as Boston, but we're also global. So I wanted to also give a quick introduction for myself. I'll be moderating today's panel. My name is Alex Chung. I'm the director at Venture Cafe in Cambridge. So we've been running for 15 years as a means of connecting the innovation and startup ecosystem. We're most well known for our Thursday gatherings, which we host every Thursday at Kendall from 4:30 to 8 p.m. And I'm our director, as I mentioned, but I've been with CIC for the last 12 years. So I've helped with our expansion in Rotterdam, Tokyo, here in Cambridge, and I helped open the Engine, but I've also used to run our co-working space, running all the sales and operations. So this topic was very much of interest to me, as I always think about what it is that I look for. So that's a little bit about myself. I wanted to also take a moment to introduce our lovely panelists. So we have Krista, Abby, and Elena. So Krista, if you don't mind giving a little quick intro to yourself, and then we'll dive in.
Great. Well, thanks, Alex. So my name is Krista Bleileben. I have an office at CIC, but my background is really in large corporate. For many, many years, I was in corporate and investment banking with Bank of America Securities and predecessor companies. So I do know the environment as how you work with thousands of people around the world on a regular basis. I did a quick stunt detour into public service, and I ran the Massachusetts Office of International Trade and Investments, MOID, which was both under Governor Romney as well as Deval Patrick, 2 years each, which was eye-opening to me, how coming from a large corporate, how the public sector works. But for the last 10 plus years, I've been working predominantly with early and growth stage companies and primarily international companies. So my company, Mass Global Partners, we are several of us that work together, and our clients are typically international governments or universities or international investors that want to promote entrepreneurship and want to support the building of international ecosystems in their respective places. So we see probably 100 plus early stage companies from around the world every year. And we do a lot of deep dive into how do you prepare yourself for funding, how you prepare yourself for internationalization, how do you access new markets, how do you position yourself, how do you talk to international audiences? It's very different when you come from Japan or from Germany, how to basically talk to a US audience. So Americans' attention spans are very short. Europeans tend to talk very, very long. So I mean, it's all the cultural differences that we try to teach them and get them ready for US market entry and hopefully have them do it successfully and efficiently.
Lovely. And Abby?
Hi, I'm Abby. I also have space at CIC. I have a slightly different background. I spent a long time working in universities, helping them create new startup companies, helping their inventors work out what their invention was, whether it was the foundation for a company, and then if it was a company, who was going to run it, who was going to fund it, what they needed to do to produce a minimum viable product. I managed a lot of proof of concept funds, so small amounts of money to get them to a place where they could show whether the technology worked, or more importantly, sometimes that the technology didn't work and we could all go back to the lab. I did that for a long time. I was here in Massachusetts running the Mass Tech Transfer Center, housed at UMass, and in the early 2000s, 2010, the head of UMass decided to move our office to Shrewsbury. This was not particularly convenient for people who worked in Boston and Cambridge, so we actually went hybrid at that point. It was something that was not done very much then, but we all met on a Monday in the office in Shrewsbury, and then the rest of the week everybody worked from home or wherever they needed to be, which could include CIC, because we had a CIC membership at the time. So I did that for a long time. I left university life a few years ago and am an independent consultant. Work on a lot of projects with Krista, but I still work with BU and MIT, supporting some of their faculty members and graduate students who are looking to commercialize their inventions. I'm also, and I'll probably talk more about this experience, I'm chair of the board of a group called VentureWell. VentureWell is an organization based in Western Mass in Hadley. We work with student entrepreneurs and the promotion of entrepreneurship and innovation in universities. In the last 5 years, well, 5 to 10 years, we've undergone extreme growth. So I'll be talking a lot about VentureWell's experience in changing workplace over the last 5 to 10 years.
Perfect. And Elena?
Hi, everyone. My name is Elena Lobianco. I'm a business consultant with TriNet. We are an outsourced HR services partner for startups and small businesses. We help them with the administration as it relates to things like payroll, benefits, compliance, all the fun things that everybody just loves to do on a regular basis, but is crucial for a successful foundation to any business. I used to work in the tech space, building computers and servers, managing firewalls, other fun things that nobody really likes to, to do on a regular basis, but I just saw a lot of the struggles that these small businesses had with managing their workforce, and made the switch about 3 years ago and fell in love with Boston's startup community. I love to support, connect the dots for all the entrepreneurs and help realize their brilliant innovations and help them come to life.
Lovely. So now you know a little bit more about our panelists. I also want to just preface, it's no coincidence that we have a number of companies from CIC. You know, we represent several hundred companies just in the Cambridge-Boston area. So there are a number of folks who you'll see. You probably even see the CIC badges. I see them all over, not just this city, but when I travel abroad. So it's really fun to kind of check out. We are a kind of global organization, and you have access to all the CICs globally. So with that, I just wanted to ask kind of the audience, for this group, who here works for an organization that has offices not just in one city? Okay, so I'm led to believe that many of you have offices that are just in one city. And then how many people represent kind of HR for their companies? And how about for startups? And they can overlap as well. And who are the rest of you all? Yeah? Student, okay. Are there other represented groups? This will also help us decide how we want to take this conversation. Software development, project management? You're just curious. You're curious about hybrid. All right. Looking for a new startup. All right. Well, there are a small number of handful of people here who say they're from startups, so feel free to find them. So on this panel today, we're going to be talking about how companies are redefining their workplace in this era of hybrid work. It sounds like Abby started this way earlier in 2010. I'm actually from that Shrewsbury area, so I know it's a schlep to get to and from Boston. But we want to see how how to build a collaborative culture within these shifting environments. So the need for flexibility has kind of become paramount and really important for modern workplace. While hybrid is everywhere. People say they want hybrid. People say they are part of hybrid. But in-person interaction is still valued, and that's something that we're seeing now. We actually wanted to dive into this really deeply as CIC, so we engaged the Harvard Business research team to conduct a study around workplace culture and changes. And one of the things that we found is that 86% of respondents for the survey said they agreed with the statement, having the option to come into a physical office is beneficial for employees. So it's clear that people thought that this was a positive experience. Many organizations are making changes to this type of workplace that they use, perhaps altering a mix of property they own or leasing offices, and factoring what type of commitment they need for long-term or short-term for their offices. And with these changes, companies are navigating how to create in-person connections and collaboration within their spaces while also keeping this remote hybrid worker kind of dynamic in check, ultimately to hopefully nurture a vibrant collaborative culture. And I can tell you kind of from our own experience, Tricia is here from my team as our program manager. We have a team, and although we focus on building these Thursday gatherings for everyone, we're actually in the office every day of the week. So, or not Saturday, Sunday, but Monday through Friday we're in the office, and it actually builds a lot of trust within our team and with others. So it's something that we see value in. And of course, if someone's yesterday I had to cook for my sister's birthday, so I worked from home. But otherwise, for the most part, we see the value of being together in the office, and we value that hybrid kind of opportunity. So I wanted to kind of take a moment to hear from each of you quickly. What does your workforce model look like, and how does that kind of evolved over the last few years? Anyone could kick us off.
Well, maybe I can start with the VentureWell experience. So VentureWell was a small nonprofit based in Western Mass in Hadley, and going into the pandemic, we probably had about 50 employees, all in person, coming into space that we rented or leased in Western Mass. Western Mass was not always the easiest place to hire people to, particularly for a fairly specialized group, although people who came loved it. And with a lot of universities and colleges, we got a lot of spousal hires, actually. So it wasn't all bad. We did do a lot of work on Zoom and things because we worked with a lot of other groups and collaborators. So everybody was very familiar with doing Zoom meetings pre-pandemic. Pandemic hits, we send everybody home. We actually tell the senior management they have to take a 10% pay cut so we can preserve cash. And we applied, like many other people, for PPP. And then we started getting phone calls from a couple of federal agencies. We'd already done a lot of work with NSF. We'd done some work with NIH. And they had a very big project called RADx, which was the sister program to Warp Speed. So Warp Speed was $10 billion for the vaccine. RADx was for the rapid development of diagnostics. It was $1 billion program to help develop new forms of COVID tests that would be faster to use and administer. And some of those are actually now in the market. So that was sudden influx of money, needed to ramp up, needed to run these programs. We didn't get the whole $1 billion, but we were doing all of the sort of back office administration of this program for NIH. So a lot of hiring, and obviously during the pandemic, everything was absolutely virtual. We increased our employee count dramatically, and sort of really got accustomed to working online. Subsequent to that, we've got several other big contracts, again, mainly with the federal government, and our employee count is now about 150. We still do have our offices in Hadley, They are not used very much. They are still open. People can go in. We still have some employees who go in every day. Of the 150 employees, I think we now have employees in 32 states. And then we had one federal client who said, that's great, but we don't like hybrid. We don't like virtual. We need in-person, and we want it in Boston, Cambridge. So at that point, VentureWell turned around, looked at CIC, and so VentureWell now also have a physical facility at CIC for that specific project. So we're actually sort of managing part of our workforce hybrid and part of our workforce in person in Kendall Square.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, I would just say that when I was working in corporate banking, we were always international. And so to some extent, that totally precedes Zoom. Nobody knew 10, 15 years ago what Zoom was. But we also had teams between Brazil and London and Boston. So to some extent, you had to build the trust that you have built teams. And I think this is one of the challenges, if that's not hybrid or working among different time zones or geographies. How do you create a culture? How do you create trust? How do you create effective teams if you're in the same location or not? I think since the pandemic, I think the different location has taken on a new meaning. If you're working from your garage or your bedroom, or you're working from an office that's in a different, geographic location, I think there's some of the similar problems that probably we need to address. And for those of you that run organizations or in HR, how do you build that culture? How do you build the trust? How do you onboard new employees that don't really, I think it's much easier if you have worked with a team for a long time and you know each other than when you hire new people. How do you onboard, and that's perhaps a topic that you're involved in, how do you onboard people that are working remotely and that just don't, how do you kind of transmit that culture, that DNA from the company that you're hiring for?
We'll certainly get into that. At TriNet, we do embrace a hybrid workforce model. Over the last few years, especially with COVID, the pandemic has shifted things. So that approach has shifted from a predominantly in-office based structure to one that prioritizes flexibility and inclusivity. So initially the focus was ensuring that remote work was not only feasible but productive. And as the model has matured, we've integrated tools and strategies to enhance communication and collaboration regardless of physical location. The evolution has involved investing in digital collaboration platforms, rethinking office space to support hybrid interactions, and continuously asking for feedback to refine the approach.
Yeah, I think thank you all for mentioning that. I think this also ties nicely into my kind of next point, which many organizations are reconsidering kind of the facilities in general and whether they own them or they're managed. They want to know how to add enhanced digital conferencing facilities to connect remote and in-person workers, or have more, unassigned kind of library-style hot desk environment things, and generally more collaborative workspaces. How does your organization effectively collaborate in these hybrid environments, and how does the space and the physical parts of it affect that?
So as mentioned, the TriNet office spaces, they are designed with that flexibility in mind. They do feature unassigned desks, collaborative areas, state-of-the-art digital conferencing rooms. But for those of us like myself, who is not in an area with an official TriNet office location, we utilize our partners and the relationships that we've built with co-working spaces to ensure that everyone has access to the tools needed for seamless collaboration. I think it's a balancing act, so that must be paired with the technology for project management, and that balanced approach kind of ensures ongoing communication. It allows our team to effectively work together regardless of where our team is.
Nice.
Yeah, I think with VentureWell, the space we still have in Hadley, when we had to expand that space, when we went up to 50 employees, we unashamedly copied a lot of what CIC had done with their space. So small desks, a lot of hot desking, but a lot of conference rooms and a lot of phone booths so that people could really get privacy when they needed it to do those Zoom calls. And we used to do huge numbers of conference calls as well. So we knew that we needed those kinds of spaces. So we've certainly looked at how CIC designed their space and stole lots of ideas liberally. I know we're not the only people that did that. If you look at HubSpot, they, moved out of CIC and cloned it. So, it's those kinds of things. Obviously, we still have those facilities. We do have one or two sort of senior management offices in there that they have a single office, but nearly all of it is communal space. And good sort of team space to sort of do ideation work as well. So.
Yeah, I think it's also a different challenges if you are completely geographically diverse. So if you deal with teams in Paris, London, Latin America, and so forth, that's a different set of problems that you obviously have to communicate effectively. But I think a big challenge right now, especially after COVID, is if people are in the same let's say you live all in greater Boston and you run an office, how do you convince people that after 2 years working from home, 3 years working from home, to come back into the office? The options are sitting an hour in traffic each direction, or to come to office. And I was in San Francisco last week, and I talked to a very senior person from Salesforce. And if you remember, they built the tallest building in San Francisco. It opened weeks before the pandemic hit. I was fortunate to be able to have a tour, I think on the 28th of February, 2000. But he said it is absolutely, he feels completely, he enjoys going back to the office because they completely changed how they're setting up this office. It's an attractive place. It's very interactive. He spends an hour commuting into San Francisco, but he says he wouldn't want to miss it because the collaboration is really, really very, very different. So I was surprised because I thought Salesforce was one of the companies that originally said, well, I don't care where you guys are. You can be any place you want. If you want to move to Idaho, even some companies, I believe, ask for a pay cut, say if you want to work out of Idaho, that's fine. So I think, but they, I think, changed that course to some extent and really, and I think the other challenge is also if you are in a larger corporation and you are on a career track, how do you see your career evolving if you're working from home? I think there's a big argument to be made that you want to be visible, you want to be in the face of your bosses or your coworkers. How do you make yourself stand out if you're just working from your home and your bedroom? I think that's a whole completely different area for large companies, which may be very different set of problems than working in a small startup where it really doesn't matter perhaps so much.
Yeah, I love this kind of balance of looking at the kind of local small companies and international, like the different challenges we might face. I also have a friend who works at Meta, and she was saying she just wanted people to come back to the office. So she's on a committee trying to get people to come to the office because she wants to make friends. She wants to know her coworkers. And this is an area where you kind of learn what it is that drives people. Like I visited, the food was excellent. They have free meals and everything. And I was like, that's enough to get me to go. But I'm already sold. I come to the office anyway. But somehow for her, she was seeing a lot of her colleagues when they had a couple years of working remote and they feel they're more productive or they feel like that's working for them, that sometimes it's really tough to find those attractive pieces. So it's impressive that, Salesforce, they've really figured out how to make that space and environment so attractive that people want to go despite hour-long traffic. I guess I kind of want to also steer this conversation about more of the kind of culture. So as we talk about building culture, where does culture fit into the workplace conversation? Like, how does your company work to create it, both in person and also virtually?
This is just such a crucial issue because it's very hard to build culture when people aren't in the office. So at VentureWell, we do a few things. One, when we sent everybody home at the beginning of the pandemic, we made everyone a payment of $1,500 to set up their home office. So it didn't matter what they needed. We didn't want to be buying, I need a printer, I need a monitor, I need a new chair. We just said, here's $1,500. If your home office is set up and you want to buy a picture, that's fine. If you need to buy a desk and a chair and a new monitor, here's the money to do it. So we kind of did that because we knew it was an imposition, and particularly for younger people who didn't have home offices already set up or anything, we wanted to make sure that we appreciated or showed that we appreciated that was a challenge. So we still do that when people come on the team. We still give them funding to support their home office setup. We also make sure that the CEO of the organization has a virtual meeting with new employees within their first month of joining. So they all have sort of contact with senior leadership, not just their direct managers when they come on. We also fund a lot of physical meetings. So we've done one all-hands meeting that was a very expensive experience. So we haven't repeated that. We did that a couple of years ago. But each team, each group has sort of a planning meeting, so everybody comes in physically to one place in the different divisions so that they get together. And our senior executive team meet together every couple of months. So we make sure that there's a lot of physical meetings. I actually met with a friend who's at a very large company, they shall remain nameless, but Fortune 100, and he is not allowed to charge travel if he is only meeting with people from the same company. So he runs virtual teams. They cannot get together to actually meet in person. And he finds that really, really challenging. So that was something that we really...
But if he invites you, then it can be charged back, right?
Yeah. If they could invite me, they could have a meeting in Hawaii. I'd be quite happy to go. I think on the culture, though, the one thing, Krista's talked about managing people around the world. One of our sort of cultural challenges is managing time zones within the US. Obviously, our headquarters is East Coast. We still have more employees in East Coast than anywhere else. And we have employees on the West Coast. Some of them work it out, but we really do work on an East Coast work day. So if people are on the West Coast, they have to understand that from the beginning, and they have to be prepared to get up early and do a lot of early meetings, which would not be my style, but that's their choice. But we have kind of honed down on, if you're going to work for VentureWell, this is our work day. So I think culturally that was something that we really learnt to adjust as we went along, that initially that was kind of a bit more flexible, but now it's just kind of, we're East Coast work day, and that's how we roll.
Well, I think that some of the big consulting firms are struggling with this as well, like if that's McKinsey or BCG or Accenture and so forth. They are pretty permitting people to work from different locations, but at the same time, they're very diligent to have regular in-person meetings, or at least also regular meetings amongst the teams, if that's virtually or in person. I think it's important to have a certain schedule so that there is a certain routine that you meet. If that's a Monday morning meeting in person or virtually, but at least to establish a schedule and have some sort of a discipline, as opposed to just let everyone do whatever they want and come and go as they wish. People, even if they work virtually and remotely, I think they should know that there's a certain schedule and there's certain times when they're expected to be part of the team and part of the organization. But I think the way, I think we will never get back to the way we worked 10, 15 years ago, where everyone was 9 to 5 or whatever in the office. I think people do appreciate the flexibility, and I think if you're running an organization, you need to account for, how do you actually balance this? On one hand, you want to have people back in the office, but at the same time, people do want to have the flexibility, and that's, if you have small children or elder care or whatever if your personal situation is, I think there's certainly some benefits from saying, okay, for me it works that I'm doing some stuff between 7 and 9 at night, and then I'm taking between 3 and 5 off. So I think you as an organization, you need to figure out how to find a good balance so that there is a structure, but at the same time there's built-in flexibility.
Such a good point. Culture is at the heart of our workforce strategy, as I believe it should be for any organization. You are only as strong as your people, and that's just not your clients, but your frontline, your employees. So having a strong, cohesive culture is essential, whether employees are working in person or remotely. To foster this culture, TriNet does really prioritize communication, that inclusivity, and regular engagement initiatives like surveys or open forums for discussion and feedback. This way, every single one of your employees feels valued and connected, regardless of where they may be physically located. I think the biggest component of that is taking action on the feedback once it is received. It's important to actually listen to what your employees tell you and take actionable steps to incorporate a change or a new strategy. Periodically, we do hold in-person team building activities and events to bring people together. We have semi-annual conferences that we will get the entire organization together from East to West Coast. But we also utilize the shared office space, the co-working locations like Cambridge Innovation Center. And we're not paid for these testimonials. We're just really big advocates of the space. We just like it there a lot. I personally can't say enough good things about co-working spaces, CIC in particular. It's a unique experience to be able to work in an office with professionals or entrepreneurs in a different industry and company than you yourself are in. They say in business, it's not what you know, but who you know. So working in a shared space does open up a world of possibilities. Plus, you have all the resources one would have in a traditional office setting. Virtually, we also rely on technology, be it Teams or Zoom, to hold virtual coffee chats, interactive webinars, collaborate on projects, have a weekly team meeting to get everybody on the same page and prioritize your week, the projects that are going on, and be able to collaborate effectively.
Yeah, I definitely feel like we especially my team enjoys this kind of in-person connection and see the value there. I think also to kind of speak to some of Abby and Krista's points around West Coast, I will say I did a SWOT analysis of co-working spaces in 2015, and I loved working on the West Coast schedule. We'd stand up at 6 a.m., but then by 2, 3 p.m., I'm out there surfing, mountain biking, rock climbing. I think you can find people whose lifestyles actually work well with that. And I think if it's communicated from the beginning that this is expected, you're on East Coast time, that works well. I think as we think about kind of international, working as an international company, we as CIC have also seen this and battled with this, right? We have a Tokyo team. So when we have an all hands, do you want them to be up at 9 p.m., 11 p.m., right? Like 1 a.m. And we've now also kind of moved towards having, a facilitated recording of those meetings. And so it's still not perfect, but it's something that, as our own organization, we're also trying to face head on in terms of building our culture that still feels inclusive and still feels, like we're hearing and being a part of a larger team. So I want to kind of go back to this Harvard Business Review survey that I mentioned, which, by the way, if you scan that QR code, you'll have access to the study itself, as well as links to CIC and Venture Cafe and our Thursday gathering, so you can see our program for this week. And so feel free to check that out. But in that survey, we referenced 93% of respondents agreed with the statement, organizations can gain operational flexibility by adjusting their workplace strategy. So other common positive business outcomes stated were improved collaboration and stronger company culture engagement. Given any workspace adjustments your organization has made, what are the results and impacts that you've seen within them?
Alex, I think there's a question from the audience.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
I can just say from Venture World's perspective, we would not be able to do what we do now if we had remained with just an office in Hadley. As a board, pre-pandemic, we had discussed growth and whether we needed to move the office to somewhere, Boston, West Coast, wherever, but certainly somewhere more easily accessible and easier to hire to. So this has enabled us to really expand rapidly.
Well, I started at TriNet just over 3 years ago. So I came in still kind of in the height of COVID, and this was my first remote position. However, I had never experienced such a collaborative workforce and team. Teams meetings and pings were consistent throughout the day. I never felt alone, even though I was actually all by myself in my little office in my house. But less than a year into my new role, the world, started to open up again. People started to go out and about, and we were able to begin holding meetings and gatherings in person if needed or wanted. I think the biggest component of that was having the option, not a requirement, not feeling like you had to, but having the option made a lot of people a lot more willing to get out there, to go and engage and hold in-person meetings. I think adopting a hybrid model, I believe the organization has definitely seen better employee engagement. I feel collaboration is more fluid. My team can seamlessly transition between a remote and in-office projects and work that needs to be done. Additionally, the focus of creating a flexible workspace has strengthened the company culture in making it more adaptable and responsive to employee needs, to the point of if you have, care or childcare, you can be flexible within your workday, still get the work done that needs to get done. And it's just led to higher employee satisfaction and retention. So I believe that absolutely has demonstrated the positive impact of a well-considered workspace strategy.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point about supporting families, supporting, where people are. Because I think if you think about entrepreneurship, a lot of, or, even just working for a corporate, you think a lot about those employees, but you have to also think about their family. And it's really inspiring when I hear about companies that are offering additional childcare or other offerings. I know at CIC we opened a kangaroo room, so if you have your child with you, you can kind of have them have a little playroom while you can still do work. I mean, it's not perfect, right? Like you still have a child there while you're trying to work, but to have those kind of flexible options, I know are really important. And I've had friends who've just said, I will not take this job because it doesn't support me with my kids, or I'm going to be paying $8,000 a month for these 2 kids to go to daycare, and I need and demand like a different type of workplace. Yeah, we can take an audience question. We'll save plenty of time. Are there other folks who have questions? I want to just kind of gauge. All right, then we'll save a lot of time for questions, please.
Thank you. The importance of getting people together in person cannot be, overstated. My last role, corporate role. My name is Nadia. I advise startups now that I broke up with corporate. In my last corporate role, I worked across borders within Europe and across the big pond. My team was all the way from the West Coast in Canada, all to the south of Germany, Italy, all across. I want to bring my team together. That was always important to me because it's just, on a screen, it's just hard, right? Let's talk about the obvious, money. How am I gonna do that? It was always such a fight within the global organization to secure the funds for travel, to get people together. So kind of twofold, the question. One is, what's the recommended share of revenue? Is there some kind of rule of thumb we could apply to determine what is the absolute minimum that I should invest in these things? And then I think B is also the part, are you gonna bring all levels to the headquarter in Europe? Because at some point I can't fly, every assistant and associate over, but then they can't marinate in the DNA over there. So what's your experience in that field to manage money and how to defend this investment?
I think at VentureWorld, from a board perspective, we look at it that we are not spending so much on physical facilities anymore. You know, obviously with the One NIH project, we now do have physical facilities at CIC. We still have our lease in Hadley. We've still got a few years to go on that lease, so we're not going to change anything on that at the moment. But we have expanded so much, and we have not had to expand our real estate footprint. So we see it as moving some of that overhead from physical facilities to meetings. But it's hard, and if we had a budget crunch, I'm sure travel would be the first to go, but at the moment we've been lucky not to have to do that. But you're right, people have much different interactions when they're in a room, and they're much more likely to pick up the phone, talk to people that they've actually met in person. Yeah. I think if you look at meeting with people, if you met them in person and then you work with them online, it's a very different interaction than if you've only ever met them online. And so we certainly invest in that, and we sort of frame it around mainly planning and strategy meetings. So we need to get everybody together. They'd probably be spending a day or two anyway doing that if they were all in the office. So it's kind of an added cost onto that activity. But
yeah, well, I think it's setting the priorities. I mean, I think perhaps in some organizations, travel is seen as a luxury. But I think if you're going into this hybrid model, as Abby says, you're saving hopefully some space on fixed office costs, long-term leases, then you need to reallocate some of that to say, okay, we need to, the travel is a priority. It's not a luxury. It's part of how we operate. I find it that it's so much easier to work with people that you know. So once, I think that the initial meetings, if at all possible, if you're pitching to an investor or if you're meeting potential employees, should be in person. Once you know someone, I think it's a completely different story. I mean, now I feel like, why should I travel across town to meet with someone for half an hour when I just pick up the phone and, I know them. So that works totally fine. But if you want to have an initial meeting, I think there's absolutely value in trying to do that in person. We also see, since we work predominantly with international companies in cohorts, so we have typically anywhere from 8 to 15 companies come for several weeks at a time. How much bonding happens between them during that week or 2 weeks that we work with them. And that, I think, is perhaps underappreciated because they then become support systems to each other. And especially in the startup world, when companies are small and ship can be very lonely sometimes when you don't have your peers, you create these peer groups. And so we worked with international governments how to establish these new ecosystems. People look at Boston or San Francisco and say, wow, this is great, can we do this here? But it's not something that happens overnight. But by building these regular cohorts and the one generation becomes almost a mentoring group to the next generation. That's already a start, how you build sort of these entrepreneurial ecosystem teams.
Yeah, and I think I loved this question, especially as, we're an organization where we're not saving on office costs. We are the office. So, but we've actually faced this ourselves where we actually, for Venture Cafe, we wanted to have a global gathering. And admittedly this year we were like, well, this is how much it's going to cost. And, it's a reality where not all teams are willing to pay for that. But I would say definitely get creative, right? I've had these conversations with my superiors or with my colleagues saying, can this be like a pizza party thing? If I raise this amount of money, can we go to do this? We actually were fortunate enough where our teams worked really hard and we applied for different kinds of grants. So we actually won a grant from the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, and that will allow us, we're beholden to host a large gathering for startups and entrepreneurs in Tokyo. This will be the last week of February of next year. but that will also pay for all of our teams to meet in Tokyo. So this was what we did to kind of approach that, where we normally wouldn't have the budget to do that. And also stay tuned, because we're going to have a pitch contest. So you can pitch your way to Tokyo. So every city is going to send someone, and they're all going to pitch like kind of like a startup World Cup. So, but I would say definitely think creatively, figure out if, you know, if the budget's already set for the year, try to find other ways. Like, but I think to their points, it would make sense if it was accounted for, or like recognize that you're saving elsewhere, and thus should use that money, prioritize it for travel.
Can we go? Do you need any speakers in Tokyo?
You can apply to pitch. You can pitch and see if you can make it. But we'll talk after this. Questions? Yeah. Please introduce yourself and yeah.
Sure. Hey, what's up? I'm Jack. I own a music and audio company that makes music and audio for content, primarily for brands and marketers. My question is, this is all very, very interesting to me and my company, because we're all over the U.S. We do work hybrid, remote. But I would love just any sort of insight or thought that you have thinking about a smaller company. Because, you know, a lot of what you guys are talking about, you're talking about big, big companies, and that's really interesting, because I think some of those things can apply. But I would just be curious if you have any thoughts about strategy for, you know, a company of 10 people or less, because it's a whole different dynamic.
I mean, I think, you know, obviously we're residents at CIC, but the great benefit of CIC is that you have colleagues without having colleagues. So you're in a community, you're seeing other people, you're meeting people in the kitchen, there's people you can ask questions of. So, you know, if you've got people working remotely, but you can get them into co-working spaces, I think they have a much different work experience than if they're just sitting at home and, you know, looking at the computer or screen all day. You know, I think a lot of very small companies, and we work with lots of really small companies, they still value coming into somewhere, and it kind of builds that cohort around them. So, you know, it's really hard with new employees, though. I mean, you know, I talked about my early hybrid experience, and the great benefit that we had was we'd worked together as a small team. There were 5 of us for a few years before we went hybrid. And so we knew what we were doing. We knew, you know, what we needed to do together, and then how we could interact. And I was really lucky. I never had to hire somebody. I never lost an employee during that time, so I never had to hire somebody, because I think that's the real issue, is when you get a new employee and you're a small organization, do you get them to come in and work alongside you for a week or so, or how you do it? But I think, you know, finding places where they don't necessarily have to work at home could really help them.
I think, I mean, as you say, I think CIC or similar spaces are, I think, great, because you are in a community without having, you know, your boss looking over your shoulder or something. I mean, you're basically, even if you work by yourself, you're part of a community. And these are community of peers, so there could be, you know, people from different age groups, different companies, but there's a lot of cross-fertilization. There's a lot of collaboration that happens within, because, you know, if you have an employee in San Francisco and another one in, you know, in Texas or so, but they may need some support if that's helping with a website or helping with a marketing idea or so. So there's a lot of cross-fertilization, I think, that happens amongst different companies, just by being embedded in sort of a group setting, such as like a co-working space.
Absolutely. It's also significantly less expensive than a traditional lease, and you have the flexibility not necessarily to rent an office there. You can just subscribe for memberships, get desks. This way you can choose which days of the week works better for your workforce to come in, collaborate on projects. But also, to Krista's point, like I had said earlier, in business, it's not what you know necessarily, it's who you know. So within these communities, you do find a significant amount of different ideas, insights, other people that are there to really support you, and that's that community aspect. of it. That's really a beautiful thing. They don't necessarily work at your company, so you have different thoughts, different ideas, different resources to tap into, while still having, you know, your desk, your chair, your monitor, your standard office supplies that you need, but it's that people component that I think is really the difference.
Well, I think you need to rethink that. Some mistake that I see some big companies do when they kind of downscale their office space and then go into perhaps a collaborative space like an innovation center, is they're looking at it, how much is a square meter cost? And they're equating it to, you know, an office of, you know, whatever, 100 square feet or something. But you may get less private space, but you gain so much more public space. And I think that's really the benefit, the collaboration space. There are, you know, the large kitchen areas, or there's the conference rooms, and it's all the stuff that, so you have to look at it in a different way. You pay, you know, probably less money, but you're paying it also in a different way, as opposed to having your own little.
This is actually a CIC story. Analog Devices used to have, they acquired a company that was at CIC, and one of the terms of the acquisition was that these people who had founded this startup company were not going to move from CIC. So Analog said, okay, we'll keep you at CIC and you can still have the space. So Analog, I think, had spaces in 22 different countries at the time. They had facilities. And their real estate division did two calculations. One was the cost per square foot. And the cost per square foot of CIC was the most expensive in the world. It was more expensive than their space in Manhattan. They then did another calculation, which was cost per capita. And the space at CIC was cheaper than Indonesia. Because while you're paying for a lot of money for a small amount of personal space, but you get so many meeting rooms, kitchens, everything else on top of that, that you're not paying, you know, every month for that. It worked out really well. So it's looking at those kinds of things when you're looking at what things are going to cost.
Yeah, most of our companies are actually under those 10 people mark. So they pay for the culture that we build. So we've had countless success stories where companies have grown to 10, 20, 30, 100 people. And at those points, like they could afford their own space. It's much cheaper per square foot, but they rely upon the culture that we build, right? Like they want to come to our weekly wake up every Tuesday and have, you know, this morning we had breakfast and donuts and things, and they come together with not just their team, but meet other teams. And that's for them worth it to pay more to have that culture built in. I know you have a microphone. Was this a follow-up thing? Or, okay.
Hello, I'm Ert Dredge, he, him pronouns. I'm at a company called Panorama Education around the corner from here, also incubated at CIC a dozen years ago, but we did move on when we got very big. But less around the corner and more, we're pretty fully remote and hybrid. And I'm all in favor of everything we've talked about here around getting in person as much as possible, or making sure that you have opportunities for that. But a lot of our culture has moved into online spaces. It exists in Slack, it exists in on Zoom certainly, but in other like asynchronous places. Do you have thoughts about how to foster a collaborative culture in digital spaces?
So a lot of my team is actually not in Boston. They're fairly dispersed. I have some people in Texas, Florida. I have colleagues that I work with on a regular basis that are in California. And with the exception of those semi-annual conferences where we do get everybody together, I mostly communicate with them over Teams. And I have recurring meetings with some of the people that I work most closely with. I'll schedule a bi-weekly on a Thursday morning coffee talk with some of my close colleagues. And I think just leaving an open stream of communication, letting people that you work with know that I'm not accessible 24/7. But if you ping me, depending on if I'm in a meeting, I will get back to you within a certain amount of time. And I think if they just know that you are there, it's a little bit the same of, hey, somebody's in the office right next to you, let me go and knock on their door. That sometimes can be a little bit more intrusive than slacking somebody or sending somebody a ping on Teams and then waiting for them to free up and then, hey, I'm gonna throw some time on your calendar. Great. So I'm the queen of creeping calendars. I live by my calendar. I throw time on people's calendars all the time. And if you have that type of workplace culture where that is okay to just, hey, I'm here. If you need me, reach out, send me a ping, shoot me an email, throw time on my calendar. I think it just fosters that level of collaboration.
I mean, I think this is probably a negative on your question, but the one thing that I think happened in the pandemic was meeting creep. Everybody found it so easy to do Zooms. Everybody kind of wanted the community that Zooms created at the beginning of the pandemic. And it was so easy to get so many people into a Zoom. So I think we've really cut back on how many Zoom meetings we have and really looked very clearly at who needs to be in which meetings. And actually, one of my fellow board members at VentureWell, during the pandemic, they took over software development at Ford. He said, if there's going to be more than 100 people in any Zoom meeting, I am not attending. I don't need to be there. And, they just saw within the company that as soon as you could invite lots of people, a lot of people started attending all of these meetings. And I think that was one area where technology didn't help, because you were no longer restricted by the size of the meeting room that you could get. So I think you have to be really, really careful. VentureWell Slack is absolutely ubiquitous, but it's kind of policed a little bit because you don't want to get sort of too far out in Slack and too many people involved in some of the conversations. So you have to be very careful about what digital tools you use. And again, it's a cultural issue as to how you develop their use and make sure that you're making it as productive as you can for the company. I think it's very easy to get sucked into this use of technology too much and it becomes unproductive. So I think it's a great question, but I think, I've got more negatives as to how some of the technology is not helping versus, people no longer just pick up the phone, and sometimes that's the most easy way to solve a quick problem.
There's a little bit of technology creep. Right now I need to check, you check WhatsApp, you check iMessages, you check Slack, you check Calendly. I don't know, there's all these little platforms because everyone says there's so much junk going on your emails. So everyone is coming up with new platforms. So now you have all these other new platforms you need to check. So I think I think you, as Abby also said, I think you need to be disciplined when you send a message. Don't always reply. Establish a protocol, because I think it's too easy to reply all. And what absolutely drives me crazy is people take an old email, press reply. The subject line has nothing to do with what we are talking about. And so they're taking some old stuff, and then all of a sudden, if you're looking for an old message, you have no idea, the subject line has nothing to do with what you're actually talking about. So be very precise in addressing an email, be precise in drafting it short, and be efficient. That's something we teach our international companies, because they write long emails, and they said every day they're here in the United States, every day they're spending more time, their emails are getting shorter, because you have to be, I think, a little bit more efficient in and also who you're addressing, who you're CCing, who you're blind CCing, and just trying to establish, I think, a protocol. I see a lot of heads going like this.
So for those of you who don't have a company yet and want to work on something, it sounds like this is an unsolved issue. So you can chat with them afterwards. We have time maybe for one or two more quick questions.
Ooh, there's a lot of hands going up.
And the guy with the mic wins.
I just so happen to have the microphone. My
Yeah,
fault.
that's great.
I'll try to be fast. I don't know. I'm Tank. I am an HR consultant and director of employee services for a small firm called Let There Be HR. My question kind of is a little bit loaded. We spent the time talking about people who already work for wherever you work, right? In a hybrid workforce where you also still need to consider some point you might be looking for new candidates, and we're talking about accessibility and reasonable accommodations. And not just the physical, not just the neurological distance, for example, right? I'm from Dorchester. I'm not driving to Hadley, right? And this is coming from an able-bodied person, and we're not even just talking about that thing either, but parents of maybe not babies, but like, to keep it PG for the recording, I was a mischievous child. So all those things considered, how does keeping that level of inclusivity in your talent acquisition plan play into the not so much talked about significant reduction in your candidate pool for people who, even if they do speak up, we know there are companies and leaders out there who are like, well, it is what it is, and we just can't move like that because of our hybrid policies and expectation to collaborate in the workplace. If you've encountered that, if not, what's your thoughts? Give me the whole nine.
Yeah, actually, at Venture World, we've been looking at this a lot because we've had a lot of DEI initiatives, and now we're adding accessibility and how we make sure that, both for employees, but also for our contracts and the people that we work with, that we have a much greater consideration about accessibility. So it's a work in progress, but it's certainly, bubbling up to the top and becoming much more critical to the way that our operation runs.
We are out of time, but thank you so much to this amazing panel. We have one more session today in this room, and the name of the session is Into the Unknown, Planning Your Startup's Exit Strategy. So if that interests you, please stick around, and if you're tuning in virtually, please also stick around. Lastly, for those of you who are in your early stage of your startup, this Friday, you'll get the opportunity to share your venture at Startup Boston Week's closing party. If you're interested in that, you can ask our volunteers for more information on how to sign up. You do have to sign up in person, not remotely. Thank you guys so much, and that's it. Thanks.
Thank you.